questions or comments, I'll be happy to respond. Yeah.
I'm curious, pre-Reformation, before the Bible was translated to the vernaculars of the people, the Lord preserving a remnant of gospel-believing people, how do they even interact with the Lord without His Word? I don't understand. Like, how did that work if they didn't speak Latin or Greek? Just a normal plowman that can, how did that work before the translations?
Yeah, well, there were certain groups of Christians, say pre-Reformation, the Waldensians. So a fellow by the name of Peter Waldo, he would try to translate it. You'd have little shards and bits, so they would write out things like the Lord's Prayer, bits of the Sermon on the Mount. So some people would get and would commit to memory certain bits and shards of the Scripture. There would be bits that would be that might be read out. If anybody had some of those bits, and we imagine that if people, if they couldn't read, they couldn't get the word, but it was very much an acoustic culture. So things would be read out loud, so people would pick these up and memorize them and pass them along. So there were scant and few and far between opportunities, but for many, that was not much of an option. They would see the visible scriptures in the different images that would be explained, stained glass windows and things like that. But then that was often a mixture of biblical stories and then fabulous stories. Your historical things of saints, and what was actually scripture and what was not was often very blurry. So it was not a wonderful place to be in. It's true. Yes.
Am I right in thinking that that's been the case for most of the history of God's people? Access to the Word, very limited.
Yes, it always has been very, very limited.
Until recently.
Until recently. And this is one of the critical things is people, if you don't have your own little copy of scriptures to have your quiet time at home, what would you do? Well, you would gather among the people of God, the church, and the scripture would be read. So we'll see in Paul's epistles, read this in the hearing of the people. Then send it on to the next, take it from Colossae on up to the next. So the reading and preaching would be the way that people would get the word, rather than necessarily reading it for themselves. That was far less common. The vast majority of your intake of Scripture would be in public settings, historically.
Can you talk a little bit about the impact of Farel's own writing in French-speaking?
Oh, great! Yes, great comment. He did. Farel. So he was a good Latinist, but he spoke and wrote. His entire corpus is in French. Was in the colloquial. This was one of the instincts of the Reformation. We need to have the Bible and theological language in the language of the people. So he wrote extensively in colloquial French, and those treatises on doctrine. He's got a little systematic theology too in French that he put out, and these things were copied and passed along and read and enjoyed in the French-speaking valleys of Switzerland, and also among many of the refugees, because many of those who were responding to the gospel and were experiencing fierce persecution in France. These were refugees that would come to Geneva and other places of Switzerland where they would be able to enjoy freedom of the gospel. Yeah.
The Wikipedia page on Farel, which I was glancing at as we were talking, said that, so I don't know if it's true or not, maybe you can comment, said that he and Calvin had disagreements over the Eucharist or the Lord's Supper, and that was somewhat fierce. Could you comment on the nature of those disagreements?
Sure.
If you know, if that's even a real thing, I don't know.
No. It is. That is. I'll comment first on their disagreement, then I'll comment on the adjective fierce. Okay.
Sure, yeah.
Farel is very, very influenced by Luther and his writings. Some of the first means of him coming to understand the gospel was in reading Luther. So he is very Lutheran in his view. So his doctrine of the Lord's Supper or the Eucharist is very, very Lutheran. Where Calvin would have differed, and many of the Swiss do differ from the Lutherans in terms of having a real physical presence in the Eucharist, disconnected from faith. So it is present in the Eucharist, apart from the faith of the recipient, just because this is what God does. He gives himself physically to us in the Eucharist. So Farel has a very Lutheran doctrine. So there was disagreement as to that. It was always feisty. Farel is a feisty fellow. Fierce, well, in terms of each holding on to their own convictions, fierce. Fierce in the sense of unfriendly? No. These fellows are fast friends. And Calvin is a very devoted friend too. He loves his friends and has very, very extensive correspondence with them. And he's often portrayed as a very unfriendly figure. His friends did not think so. There was a good French friendliness that was true about him. People think he was humorless, oftentimes. I don't know. So one story about Calvin, and now you while he was in Geneva, he had a little messenger boy, and he would write things out, and he would give them to his messenger boy. The messenger boy would take them across town to some other pastor. And one time he was in his study, and the messenger boy had a little friend, and he gave a letter to the first messenger boy and sent him off, and he was just watching this other little boy just looking longingly. Oh, he gets to deliver messages for Master Calvin. Oh. So Calvin notices this, grabs a piece of paper, scribbles something on it quickly, comes to the little boy and says, "You've got to get this across town as quickly as you can. It's vitally urgent. Can you do this for me and the sake of the gospel?" Oh yes. Off he rushes, comes across the town, Beza opens the thing up, and the little note writes, "Pretend this is something incredibly important." Now, I like a guy like that. I like a guy who can kind of enter into the little mind of the child and just give him the first little thrill of helping out the gospel cause. Yes.
So this is the first story, at least I've heard that you tell, where there's actually quite a bit of success with this gentleman, preaching the Reformed ideas. I mean, he told us about Tyndale and I probably missed us, but there were many others who sort of had the same message, but just were frustrated. And I wonder if you could maybe have some thoughts on why he was so successful, whereas others were not. Was it a matter of time, or was it something else?
Yeah. How is it that the gospel seems to succeed and spread in some places and not in others? And it's interesting that the pattern that we get in Switzerland, you'll notice, we keep referring to votes. See, they had a very different political system there. That if some of the counselors and elders and then the citizens thought, you know what, we want to hear these things and we want to decide for ourselves what we think is right. So you would have debates. So the Reformation, notice, proceeded in Switzerland through these public debates. And then the counselors and the aggregated citizens would literally vote. And you would vote in the Reformation or vote it out. No, we don't want to have that here. So when you have a situation in which you can actually, the political structure will actually entertain your best presentations and then make a vote on that. The Reformation tended to do very well. If you just had a situation where you had some regent that you say, I don't want to have anything to do with this, and could suppress it, it would do less well. It seemed to do well where they had occasions for open debate and preaching. Less well in the places where you would be killed right away. France, it's hard, because if they catch you, they kill you. So, yeah. Oh, we should probably dash. Thank you. Lord willing, next time, maybe Martin Booser, or maybe Oklahoma Podius. We'll see. Thank you very much. I wonder if some of you could help out